The Browns came back to practice after the preseason game, and Shedeur Sanders immediately gave Cleveland another reason to keep this quarterback competition open. There were no pads. There were no massive downfield bombs, and this was not some flawless practice where every throw ended in a touchdown. But when I went through the individual reps, the red zone work, the blitz period, and the quarterback tracker, one thing kept jumping out at me. Shadur was seeing the field well, manipulating defenders, and consistently putting the football where his receivers could actually make plays. And that matters right now, because Cleveland is getting closer to the point where this competition has to turn from evaluation into a decision. Todd Monken basically admitted that himself. He was asked whether the Browns are approaching this upcoming stretch like a dress rehearsal, and his answer was interesting. He said he was leaning in that direction, but he was not ready to make that call yet. Then came the obvious follow-up. If they are treating the next game that way, does that mean a quarterback decision is coming? Monken pushed back. But then he said something that I think tells us plenty. He would love to have a decision today. He would love to have one by next Monday. And the reason he cannot make it yet is simple. Cleveland still has football left to evaluate. 4 more practices, another game, more opportunities for these quarterbacks to separate themselves. That tells me the Browns are not looking for excuses to keep the competition alive. They are looking for evidence. And Shadur just gave them another strong piece of evidence. The first thing that caught my attention was the red zone period. This is where Shadur seemed especially comfortable. He was getting the ball out on time, he was moving defenders with his eyes, and he was repeatedly finding receivers in tight areas without forcing the football into dangerous windows. One of the best examples came on a throw to Jerry Jeudy. At first glance, it is easy to look at the play and think, okay, nice completion, but slow it down and there is much more happening. Shadur opens the play toward one side, sells the action, gets his body moving, and then delivers the football over multiple defenders to Jeudy. The ball is not simply thrown toward Jeudy. It is placed where Jeudy can extend and make the catch while the defender has very little chance of making a play on it. That is quarterbacking. And I know people are going to say, well, it is only practice. Of course it is. The players were not even wearing pads. That is exactly why I am not treating these reps as proof that Shadur has won the job. But I am absolutely treating them as evidence of development. The throw to Jeudy was particularly interesting because the ball placement was excellent. Shadur did not need to launch it 40 yards downfield. He needed to understand where the defender was, where Jeudy was going, and how much room he had to work with. Then he needed to put the ball into that tiny window. He did, and there were several throws like that throughout the practice. The connection with Harold Fannin Jr. was another one that stood out. Shadur worked through the pocket and found Fannin toward the back of the end zone, again showing that touch and placement that have become some of the more intriguing parts of his game. That is becoming a theme with Shadur. He does not necessarily need to overwhelm you with arm strength every single possession. He can win with anticipation, accuracy, timing, and manipulation. And when you add his improved pocket movement to that, the picture becomes much more complete. One of the things people criticized about Shadur coming into this competition was his tendency to drift in the pocket. That criticism is not something I would completely erase, because there are still situations where he needs to tighten up his footwork and maintain his pocket discipline. But there is a difference between drifting, because you are losing the pocket and moving backward deliberately, because pressure requires it. During the blitz period, Shadur showed the second version. He was able to fade away from pressure while still keeping himself in position to throw. Think of it like a counterpuncher in boxing. Instead of panicking when the pressure comes, he creates just enough space to let the play develop. That is a valuable skill for an NFL quarterback. And it was especially relevant because Cleveland was working through blitz packages during this practice. That has been one of the more interesting areas of Shedur's preseason evaluation. The Browns have already shown that he can attack pressure. We saw that in the preseason game with the big completion to Luke Florio, and now we are seeing similar concepts in practice. The defense brings extra pressure. Shadur recognizes it. He stays alive, and then he gets the ball out. One of the throws in this period went toward Dylan Sampson, with a defensive end running step for step in coverage. The ball actually touched Sampson's hands, but this was an extremely difficult catch because of the defender closing from behind. I do not look at that play and say, incomplete, bad quarterback. I look at it and say, the quarterback gave his receiver a chance. That distinction is incredibly important when you evaluate quarterbacks. Not every good throw becomes a completion. Sometimes the defense makes a great play. Sometimes the receiver cannot finish. Sometimes the ball hits a hand and falls incomplete. The question is whether the quarterback made the correct decision and delivered the ball accurately enough to give his player an opportunity. Shadur was doing that. Then came another touchdown connection with Dylan Sampson. And I really like what Cleveland is doing with Sampson in this offense. The Browns have multiple backs who can create problems, but Sampson has repeatedly shown that when he gets the football in space, good things tend to happen. Shadur seems comfortable getting the ball to him quickly, especially on checkdowns and underneath concepts. That may not sound spectacular. It should not. That is the point. NFL offenses need quarterbacks who understand when the defense has taken away the explosive play and are willing to take the easy yards instead of forcing something unnecessary. Shadur did that again here. Quick decision, quick release. Let Sampson work. Move on. Those are winning quarterback habits. And then there is the pre-snap operation. This is something I am watching more closely now, because it does not show up cleanly in a quarterback tracker. A stat sheet can tell you that a quarterback completed 71% of his passes. It cannot tell you whether he recognized the coverage before the snap. It cannot tell you whether he communicated the protection correctly. It cannot tell you whether he changed the play at the line. It cannot tell you whether the entire offense was aligned and ready to go. Those details matter enormously. And according to the practice observations, Shadur and the offense looked increasingly connected before the snap. Players appeared to be on the same page, and decisions were happening quickly. That is a major part of the growth Cleveland has been talking about. Remember, Barry specifically praised Shedur's processing speed and his ability to operate an offense that puts responsibility on the quarterback before the snap. Now we are seeing examples of what that actually looks like. Shadur sees the defense. He understands what the coverage is giving him. He uses his eyes to hold defenders. And then he throws to the space he has created. One particular red zone play showed that perfectly. Shadur looked across the formation and recognized that the defense was playing high and giving him a certain look. Instead of immediately locking onto the receiver he wanted, he used his eyes to influence the defender. He held the safety in place, manipulated the coverage, and then delivered a safe ball to Harold Fannin after creating the opening. That is not simply arm talent, that is mental processing. And that is the part of Shedur's game that could ultimately determine whether this competition goes in his favor. Because Cleveland already knows he can throw, the question is whether he can consistently process the game fast enough to operate the offense. Right now, the answer appears to be getting more encouraging. Now, before anybody starts acting like Deshaun Watson had a terrible practice, let me stop that conversation right there. He did not. Watson also had a productive day. He threw a touchdown in the goal line period, had some good throws, and once again showed the athletic advantage that he has over Shadur. Watson is a different type of quarterback. He was running read option concepts, quarterback draws, and designed runs long before he got to Cleveland. His athleticism is a legitimate part of his game. That matters. If Cleveland decides that quarterback mobility is going to be a major part of the offense, Watson can give them things that Shadur does not naturally bring to the same degree. But that does not mean Shadur has to become Watson. That is an important distinction. Shadur does not need to win the competition by becoming a more athletic version of Watson. He needs to win by being better at the things that make him effective. Accuracy, timing, anticipation, pocket manipulation, processing, ball placement. Those are his weapons. And when he is executing those things, the offense can look very different. The quarterback tracker actually produced an interesting comparison from the practice. Shadur was around 71%. Watson was around 76%. Both were credited with 3 touchdowns during the red zone work. If you only look at those numbers, Watson had the better statistical day, but that is why I keep saying the tracker is a barometer, not the final verdict. The context matters. There was a rough 2-minute period for Shadur. He did not move the ball particularly well and had a throw behind Harold Fannin. Watson, meanwhile, apparently had more success in that portion of practice. But Watson also had a false start and a delay of game issue during the 2-minute work. And that is where the evaluation gets complicated. A quarterback competition is not a video game where you simply add touchdowns and completion percentage and announce a winner. Coaches are watching everything: the good, the bad, the ugly, the response. And that last part is critical. What happens after a quarterback has a bad drive? Does he start forcing throws? Does he get conservative? Does he lose rhythm? Or does he come right back and execute the next opportunity? Shadur has already had plenty of moments this offseason where he has shown that he can respond after mistakes. This practice was not perfect. That is fine. In fact, I would rather see a practice with both positive and negative moments because it gives the coaching staff something real to evaluate. If Shadur threw 3 touchdowns and completed every pass, there would be less information to work with. Instead, they got a strong red zone performance, good blitz responses, quality ball placement, some impressive pocket work, a rougher 2-minute period, and a few throws that could have been better. That is useful. That is football. And Todd Monken is clearly trying to figure out how much he can trust each quarterback when the structure of the play breaks down. That is why the scramble drill work caught my attention too. When the initial concept disappears, Shadur has shown an ability to keep the play alive and continue searching for an answer. He does not always need to escape the pocket and run 20 yards. Sometimes the best move is simply to create enough separation from the rush to reset your throwing platform. That was visible during this practice. He moved, he reset, he kept his eyes up, and he delivered. Again, those are not highlight reel plays, they are quarterback plays. And when you are trying to determine who should run an NFL offense, those details become incredibly valuable. Then you have the running back situation, which I think could become a major factor in how this offense develops. Dylan Sampson continues to look explosive, and Rocket Sanders is also getting opportunities. Add Quinshon Judkins to that group, and Cleveland suddenly has a backfield with multiple ways to attack a defense. That is good news for whoever wins the quarterback job. A quarterback does not need to throw 40 times every week when the offense can consistently create problems with the running game and then use those looks to open up play action. For Shadur specifically, that could be extremely important. His ability to manipulate defenders off play action is one of the reasons I keep coming back to those throws to Jeudy and Fannin. When the running game is respected, the linebackers step forward. When the quarterback sells the action properly, safeties hesitate. And when the quarterback can manipulate those defenders with his eyes, suddenly a throwing window appears that was not there a second earlier. That is where Shadur can make defenses pay. And that is why I am less interested in whether he throws one giant touchdown than I am in whether he consistently creates these smaller advantages. The Browns do not need a quarterback who wins every play. They need one who keeps putting the offense in good situations. There is still a long way to go. Monken made that obvious. He wants the decision sooner rather than later, but he is not willing to force it before the evidence is there. The upcoming practices and game will continue to matter, and by the time Cleveland reaches the point where it needs to prepare specifically for Jacksonville, the coaching staff wants to know who is further along. That phrase is important, further along. Not who has the biggest contract, not who was drafted highest, not who has the biggest name, who is further along. That is the standard. And right now, Shadur is making a very strong case that he belongs in that conversation until the very end. But I am not ready to say he has won it. Watson is still producing. He still has the athletic advantage. He still has experience. He still has the ability to make plays outside structure that can change a game. And the Browns clearly still respect what he brings to the table. That is why the next stretch is so important. If Watson has another strong game and Shedeur struggles, the entire conversation can swing again. If Shedeur takes the next game and plays clean, efficient football while continuing to make the difficult throws, then the pressure moves in the other direction. And that is exactly what makes this competition so fascinating. Neither player needs to destroy the other. They just need to create enough separation in the areas Cleveland values most. For Shadur, that means continuing to show that the game is slowing down for him. The processing has to stay sharp. The pocket movement has to remain disciplined. The ball placement has to stay consistent. And the turnovers have to stay under control. For Watson, it is about proving that the veteran experience and athleticism can translate into consistently efficient quarterback play. Because at some point, Cleveland is going to have to choose, and when that decision comes, I do not think the contract is going to save anybody. That is the message Barry has already delivered. Performance will decide it. And Monken's comments reinforce that the evaluation is still active. So I look at this practice, and I come away encouraged by Shadur, but not blinded by it. That distinction matters. He had a strong red zone period. He made impressive throws to Judy and Fannin. He connected with Sampson. He handled blitz looks well. He showed improved pocket movement. He manipulated coverage with his eyes. He operated efficiently before the snap. But he also had a rougher 2-minute drill and some throws that could have been cleaner. Watson had his own positives. He also had some mistakes. That is why the quarterback tracker does not settle anything. The film does. And the film is giving Cleveland a lot to study. For me, the most encouraging part of Shedur's day was not the touchdowns. It was the way he created those touchdowns. That is a subtle difference. If he were simply making spectacular throws because the defense happened to be out of position, I would be less interested. Instead, we are seeing him influence defenders. He is selling concepts. He is looking one way before throwing another. He is understanding where the coverage is vulnerable. He is placing the ball instead of simply throwing it. That is the foundation of an NFL passer. And when you see that developing alongside better pocket movement and faster processing, you start to understand why Cleveland is not ready to close the competition. They have a quarterback in Shadur who is still developing, but the development is happening in exactly the areas that matter. Now comes the hard part. Can he repeat it? That is what I will be watching. One impressive practice is encouraging. 2 are more interesting. A strong preseason game after those practices becomes meaningful. Then suddenly, the Browns are not just talking about potential anymore. They are talking about a body of work. And that is when this gets uncomfortable for Cleveland. Because if Shadur keeps stacking these performances, the organization eventually has to ask itself whether it is still evaluating him or whether it is simply delaying a decision it already knows is becoming harder to avoid. I do not think we are there yet, but we are getting closer. And the fact that Monken would love to have a decision by next Monday tells me the timeline is becoming very real. There are only so many practices left, only so many game reps, only so many opportunities for Watson and Shadur to separate themselves. That means every snap carries a little more weight. Every third down, every red zone possession, every blitz, every 2-minute drill, every pre-snap adjustment. This is where the quarterback battle starts becoming less about hype and more about evidence. And right now, Shadur is giving Cleveland plenty of evidence to keep studying. He is not perfect. He does not need to be. He just needs to keep showing that the good plays are becoming repeatable, that the mistakes are correctable, and that the offense functions efficiently when the game starts moving quickly. If he can do that in the next game, this quarterback competition could reach a point where the conversation changes completely. Because then Cleveland will have to choose between what it expected when camp began and what the football is actually telling it now. And those are not always the same thing. That is the part of this story I am watching most closely. The Browns are running out of time to evaluate. Shedeur Sanders is running out of time to make his case. Deshaun Watson is running out of time to create separation. And Todd Monken is running out of reasons to postpone the decision. The next few practices could tell us more about this quarterback battle than everything that came before them. And after watching this latest practice, I can tell you one thing with confidence. Shedeur Sanders did not win the job today, but he absolutely did enough to make Cleveland's decision harder.